It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, an adventure in the Rocky Mountains that would leave Jake with memories to last a lifetime. He had packed his camping gear carefully, making sure he had everything he needed to survive in the wilderness. He had a tent, a sleeping bag, a camping stove, and plenty of food and water. Jake was excited to explore the rugged terrain and see all the wildlife that called the Rockies home. The trip started out great, with Jake and his friends driving their off-road vehicles deep into the wilderness, miles away from civilization. They set up camp in a beautiful clearing, surrounded by towering trees and a crystal-clear river. The sun was setting, and the orange glow of the sky cast a warm light over the campsite. As they settled into their tents, Jake heard a faint scream in the distance. He thought nothing of it, assuming it was just an animal. But the scream continued, getting louder and more desperate. It sounded like a woman in agony, and it made Jake's hair stand on end. Jake's friends tried to reassure him that it was probably just a mountain lion, but the sound was too human-like. They decided to investigate, arming themselves with flashlights and hunting knives. As they approached the source of the scream, they saw a woman lying on the ground, bloodied and barely conscious. She was dressed in tattered clothes, and her face was twisted in agony. She was begging for help, her voice fierce and trembling. Jake and his friends rushed to her side, trying to assess her injuries. She had deep cuts on her arms and legs, and it was clear that she had been attacked by some kind of wild animal. But the wounds looked strange, almost like they had been made by a human. As they tried to tend to her injuries, the woman suddenly went into convulsions, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she began to scream again, louder than before. Jake and his friends were terrified, not knowing what was happening to her. Suddenly, the woman's body went limp, and she stopped moving. Jake checked for a pulse, but there was nothing. The woman was dead. Jake and his friends were shaken to the core, not knowing what to do. They knew they had to report the incident to the authorities, but they were miles away from the nearest town, with no cell phone reception. They decided to stay with the woman's body until morning, hoping to get a signal on their phones and call for help. As they huddled around the campfire, trying to keep warm, they heard strange noises in the darkness. It sounded like something was moving in the bushes, coming closer and closer. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest, and he could feel the fear building inside him. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, dressed in black robes and carrying a large knife. It was a man, and he looked like he had been living in the wilderness for years. He had a wild look in his eyes, and he was muttering to himself incoherently. Jake and his friends tried to back away, but the man lunged at them with the knife. They fought him off, using whatever they could find as weapons. Jake grabbed a stick and swung it at the man, hitting him in the head and knocking him unconscious. They tied him up and waited until morning, hoping to find a way to get help. But when they woke up, the man was gone, and so was the woman's body. It was like they had never been there at all. Jake and his friends were left with more questions than answers. Who was the woman, and who had killed her? What was the man's connection to her? As the sun rose, Jake and his friends quickly packed up their gear and set out to find help. They had no idea where they were or how to get back to civilization, but they knew they had to try. After a few hours of hiking, they stumbled upon a small ranger station. They burst through the door, explaining the events of the previous night and begging for help. The ranger listened to their story, his face growing more and more grim. "That woman you found," he said slowly, "she's been missing for weeks. And that man you encountered, we've been looking for him for years. He's a known killer, believed to be living somewhere in these mountains. We thought we had him cornered a few times, but he always managed to slip away." Jake and his friends were horrified. They had stumbled upon a deadly game of cat and mouse, one that they were lucky to have survived. The ranger radioed for backup, and a team of search and rescue personnel was sent to comb the area. They found the man's makeshift campsite, filled with weapons and human remains. It was clear that he had been living off the land for years, preying on unsuspecting hikers and campers. Jake and his friends were taken back to civilization, their minds reeling from the horror they had witnessed. They were grateful to be alive, but the memories of that fateful night in the Rockies would haunt them forever. In the days and weeks that followed, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something much larger than just a random encounter in the wilderness. It was like they had been drawn into a dark, twisted world of violence and death. Despite the trauma of the experience, Jake found himself drawn back to the mountains, compelled to uncover the truth of what had happened that night. He knew it was dangerous, but he couldn't help himself. As he hiked deeper into the wilderness, the memories of that fateful night came flooding back. He could still hear the screams of the woman, still feel the fear of facing off against the killer. But he also felt a strange sense of purpose, like he was meant to be there, to uncover the secrets of the Rocky Mountains. And as he continued on his journey, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that someone or something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But he pressed on, driven by a curiosity and a desire for answers that he couldn't explain.